If Mingyi really wanted to fudge the test, he could very well answer ambiguously or pretend to joke. However, he answered the first two questions simply and succinctly without any tricks, so the last answer should also be the same. Otherwise, it would be out of character for him, which would also prove that he wasn't normal. Xilian and Mingyi stared at each other calmly. A moment later, Mingyi finally spoke. He used a tone that was no different than the last two times he responded. One of the 5 elemental masters, the younger brother of the water master Wu Du, the wind master Qingshuan. Shi Qingshuan shook his head. He sighed and said, "Why the hell didn't you say, my best friend?" Mingyi looked at him. "Who's that?" he asked. Hearing this, Xilian silently blew out a breath. As mentioned before, although the Reverend of Empty Words was called Reverend, it wasn't a real man of the cloth with any holy spirituality. As long as it remained classified with ghosts and demons, it would never be able to escape from the unique traits of its kind. 3 sentences had been spoken, and all 3 were undoubtedly true, so it seemed that there was nothing amiss with Mingyi, except unless Shi Wudu and Shi Qingshuan were not real blood brothers. But such an unbelievably shocking turn of events shouldn't be possible. Unexpectedly, before he fully exhaled, Mingyi's hand suddenly shot out, grabbing straight for Xilian's throat. Xilian and Hua Chang both moved to fend off that hand at the same time. 3 hands, fast as lightning, so intense, it made Shi Qingshuan leap to his feet. "Ming Shang," he shouted, "what are you doing?" Mingyi glared at Xilian intently, speaking with a dark voice. "You asked 3 questions, but in the last round, I only asked 1. Xilian smiled and said, "Lord Earthmaster, please think back on the rules carefully. I never said you could ask only 1 question per round." "Very well," Mingyi said. "Then I'll add to my question now. Who are you?" "Didn't you already answer this question yourself earlier?" Xilian asked. Mingyi replied, "Perhaps I answered wrong. Otherwise, will His Highness please explain the need to set up this game so suddenly, and his reason for asking those strange questions?" Lord Ghost King is skilled in the art of manipulation, but to use it on petty entertainment seems to be rather unnecessary. Hua Chang laughed and said, "Well now, as long as I feel like it, I'll use it however I want." It must be said that while Xilian and Hua Chang saw Mingyi as suspicious, Mingyi also thought them equally suspicious. From the moment Mingyi suddenly struck, they had spoken through their lips and stopped using the communication array. Shi Qingshuan didn't know what they were arguing about, but he didn't care to remove his earplugs rashly either. So he could only say, "Stop, stop, stop. I order you all to stop right now and tell me what happened. Otherwise, I'm going to butt in too." Then he flashed open his Windmaster fan. Mingyi, however, shoved him aside. He said, "Move, stop adding to the trouble." Just then, an eerie breeze blew past. The flames of the small campfire that the 4 surrounded quivered with the eerie wind, dancing wildly. Silhouettes and shadows illuminated by the flames flickered madly, such that even the 2 divine statues on the altar seemed to be smiling but not, crying but not, exceedingly creepy. Mingyi then dragged Shi Qingshuan up and said alarmed, "Something's here." Shi Qingshuan was first shoved by him head first to the ground in a heap, and now was dragged up abruptly. He was dizzy and seeing stars. He said, "Ming Sheng, could you please be nicer to me?" "No time," Mingyi said. Xilian had been watching the two statues and suddenly said, "Look at their eyes." The four looked over and saw that on the smiling faces of those two divine statues hung 4 lines of blood. From the eyes of those clay divine statues streamed bloody tears. Divine statues that had been blessed in ceremonies and worshipped possessed certain repelling powers against evil. Even if there were no other measures to ward off evil, they typically still couldn't be defiled and abused by non-humans. The Reverend of Empty Words was certainly powerful. Shichingshuan was still here, and it made the statue of the Windmaster cry blood tears before the Windmaster himself. The tears of blood were growing thicker and heavier, dripping to the ground and gathering into a twisted, complex form. Shichingshuan was bewildered. He asked, "What's that thing? Is it drawing?" He couldn't make out just what shapes it was forming, and he didn't go closer, only looking at it from different angles, trying to figure it out. Soon after, Shilin suddenly snapped out of it and realized it wasn't a drawing, it was an upside-down word. He immediately shouted, "Don't look, it's written for you." Mingyi struck out a palm, and boom, both the traces of blood on the ground and the 2 divine statues were blasted into pieces. Shichingshuan's eyes were wide with shock. He shouted, "Mingxiong, you can't let my brother know about this, otherwise he'll never forgive you." To destroy a heavenly official's divine statue was to be extremely disrespectful to said heavenly official. Yet today, Mingyi first cracked the establishment plaque into 2, then blasted the statues into pieces. This was no different than smashing up someone's household, then soundly slapping the face of said household's master. If this got out and the person in question found out, they wouldn't sit back and do nothing. Who knew if a bloody storm would rise from it? Just then, Shilin idly turned his head and suddenly noticed the plaque that they had broken earlier and properly set aside had characters that weren't quite right. The establishment plaque had a blue base and golden characters, spelling the words, "Temple of Wind and Water." But now, the words had turned into twisted, bloody red shapes, seemingly forming the word, "Death." In the blink of an eye, he covered Shichingshuan's eyes and yelled in the communication array, "Close your eyes." "What now?" Shichingshuan shouted back. "Nothing," Shilin explained, "but the words on the establishment plaque of your temple have been changed too. That creature knows that you can't hear anymore, so it's changed to writing." "The hell?" Shichingshuan exclaimed. "Now I can't hear anything nor see anything. Am I not both deaf and blind?" Shilin let go of his hands and said, "Don't worry, just calm down. We're here for you." Mingyi grabbed hold of Shichingshuan's back collar and dragged him aside. Shichingshuan still had his eyes closed, and he put his palms together as in prayer. "So reassuring," he said. As the words left his mouth, there was suddenly a huge noisy commotion that came from just outside the rundown temple. Black blurs crossed Shilin's eyes, and in the next moment there was a large, rowdy crowd of people howling like devils. They poured in like a blackened tide. The crowd was truly full of bizarre strangeness, weird forms, and monstrous shapes. Some had decapitated heads, some were hanged, some had large blades piercing their skulls, some had their abdomens cut open, all sorts. Shichingshuan couldn't hear and couldn't see, but instinctively sensed the footsteps all around were disorderly and chaotic. In the ruckus, he was pushed around. He asked in the communication array, bewildered, "What's going on? What's come here? Why are there suddenly so many people?" "It's nothing major," Shilin said. "It's the night parade of the Bloody Fire Social. Let's just get out of here." Regarding Bloody Fire Socials, other than parades in the day, sometimes there would be further entertainment into the night. Not only did the parading performers want to get their fill of scaring people, many common people also had the urge to do the same. Thus, they would imitate the eerie makeup of the bloody fire social and use the dark of night to come out and scare others. Unfortunately, the 4 of them seemed to have run into such a group of night cruisers. This rowdy crowd of ordinary common people didn't have the same realistic, intricate makeup as the parading troops, but they were nevertheless formidable due to their sheer number, and it was quite the sight to behold. Especially with the dimmed skies, their appearances were exceedingly ghastly. Thus, in towns that had such after-hours entertainment on the night of bloody fire socials, locals would all lock up tightly, keeping indoors. Those night cruisers had been wandering around for some time. When they finally saw that there were people inside the broken shrine, they were quite excited, as if they spotted prey. In an instant, over 50 of them charged in, overcrowding the small temple. The 4 of them were drowned in the pandemonium. Tian kept looking back, but could only see Hua Chang, who was still next to him, never more than 2 steps away. The other 2 were pushed more than 7 to 8 feet away. He shouted, "Everyone, let's get out." However, amongst the night cruisers, while some were purely there for fun, there were others who were shrewd small merchants, there specifically to scam some money from tourists who had come from afar to watch the bloody fire social. They had blocked him, not letting him leave, clingy and tenacious as they cajoled. "Young masters, grant us some rewards. We worked so hard to dress up. If you had fun, then grant us some rewards. Yeah, it ain't easy for us either, and this is only a once-a-year thing. If you don't reward us, watch out for old Ghost Master, who will come haunt you." Since this whole affair had nothing to do with him, Hua Chang only watched from the side, not in the least bit anxious. When he heard, he only laughed out loud and said, "Well now, I'd like to see what kind of ghost dares come knocking on my door." Just then, Tian swept a look at the crowd. He suddenly saw at the edge a pale-faced, hanged ghost. It was just smiling creepily as it wrapped a rope around someone's neck. It was riotous all around. Everyone was covered in blood, their faces askew, endlessly enacting, "You kill me, I kill you, now you're dead, I'm now dead," and oftentimes there'd be someone who'd wail and fall. It was hard to differentiate the real from the fake. Still, Tian's instincts told him that the person wasn't right, and he threw out his arm. Ria flew out and struck that hanged ghost squarely on the head. Sure enough, that hanged ghost wailed and turned into a wisp of black smoke, fleeing through a small crack in the ground. No one noticed, but Tian saw everything clearly. He warned in the communication array, "Everyone, be careful. Something's here, mixed within." Compared to earlier, there seemed to be an added cloud of evil within the temple of wind and water. It naturally wouldn't be the reverend of empty words, but some little minions that came from who knows where. Having played around, pretending to be ghosts for so long, there would for sure be a day when real ones would be attracted. To have them show up right now, it really was adding fuel to the fire. There were too many people, too much chaos in the temple, heads knocking heads, feet stepping on feet. Too difficult to determine just who that essence of evil came from. Tian grabbed Hua Chang and ran out of the temple of wind and water. He was about to ask after the others, but he found that he couldn't. His power was almost depleted, and with no power, he couldn't enter the communication array. In that moment of urgency, he turned to Hua Chang. "San Lang," he said, "lend me a bit of spiritual power. I'll pay you back later." Of course, his "I'll pay you back later" was nonsense. He had never been able to pay back any powers he borrowed. "All right," Hua Chang said, then extended his hand to hold Tian's. Tian could faintly feel warmth passing over. It just so happened that a few bloody individuals came running out of the temple straight for him. The last one behind who was dropping innards as he ran, his face full of liver mortis, gave off an essence of evil. Without thinking, Tian raised his hand to blast a shot from his palm, and at the same time, a blinding white light flashed. It was only after a good moment before Tian came to. The place where that ghost with the cut belly was mixed in with the crowd had only a mound of black, ash-like residue remaining. As for the temple of wind and water before them, the entire rooftop was blown away. The rioting night cruisers in the temple stilled, frozen in shock from that booming sound and the white light. Tian raised his head to look at the temple of wind and water, now with a missing roof, then looked down at his own hand. He slowly turned his head to look at Hua Cheng standing behind him. Hua Cheng smiled at him and asked, "Was that enough?" "It was," Tian said. "Actually, really, just a little bit would have been fine." "That was a little bit," Hua Cheng said. "Do you want more? You can have as much as you want." Tian immediately shook his head. Before, he had also borrowed spiritual power from Shi Xuan, Nanfeng, and others, and they lent very generously. However, Tian had never experienced such a feeling, as if all the blood in his veins had turned into electricity and was charging through his body. If it could be said, the powers he borrowed before had to be economized and saved, taking one bite at a time, afraid to waste them. Then now, he felt like he could eat one full bowl and throw away 10 others, and it wouldn't be a problem. The powers Hua Cheng passed to him were too great, filling his entire body. It was to the point where Tian was almost afraid to move, scared that with just a wave of his hand, something else next to him was going to explode. Using the temporary calm of their surroundings, he hurriedly entered the communication array and asked, "Lord Windmaster, where are you? I've left the temple, but I didn't see you." "Ugh, my God," Shi Xuan groaned inside the communication array. "Your Highness, why did your voice suddenly get so loud? I also left the Temple of Wind and Water." Tian lowered the power level, then replied, "Sorry, I'm having some trouble controlling this. How did you leave? Are you all right?" After all, Shi Xuan had his ears plugged and his eyes closed right now. "How else could I have left?" he said. "Ming Xiong pulled me out. Thank goodness I wasn't trampled to death by that crowd." Soon after, Ming Yi's voice also sounded in the spiritual communication array. However, his words froze the small smile that had only just surfaced on Tian's face. "That wasn't me," he said. "It wasn't?" "Oh no," Tian whipped his head around and shouted, "Lord Windmaster, just who was it that pulled you away?"